and Jess TV in Lethbridge, Alberta, Canada. Thank you for tuning in. Once again, we will start tonight's show with a few headlines from the local community. After that, we are going to take a look at some other headlines and then a deep dive into the global instability of Donald Trump's current geopolitical policy and international threats that he is imposing around the world.
Upon his return to power, Chavez
already, but we will let that go for now because we are actually recording ahead of time tonight, so we're not actually live. Unfortunately, I am going to be stuck on studio, which is a good thing in my world, filming one of your favorite network television shows today, so I will be unavailable to do the show live this evening, and therefore I'm in the studio early to make sure that I had an episode of interest and information for you. Once again, our episode is brought to you by Carey Movers Limited, Western Canada's favorite Canadian-owned and operated moving company for all of your long-distance moving needs across Western Canada and, of course, the Northern Territories. You can reach Carey Movers at www.careymovers.com. That's KARYmovers.com.
Under Maduro, Venezuela
if you have a move coming up, get a free quote and pricing online at www.careymovers.com. All right, folks, let's jump into today's episode. We are going to be looking at various parts of interest to you and to the nation and the world as a whole, as we know that Donald Trump is screwing around with national security in the U.S., but also, more importantly, the global stability that has been there since the Second World War, including the migration crisis of NATO. So we'll get into that in a deep dive after we take a look at the local and national headlines that are making news around the nation.
Especially in today's
now, of course, we know that 2026 is already kicking off to be of interest and of concern.
Immigration issue is not just
in a good way and a bad way, of course, and that does not stop at the international borders, but also impacts all of our local communities across the nation, including here in Lethbridge, Alberta. Now, right now, we've already seen it being defined by a striking juxtaposition, a record-shattering January thaw across Canadian prairies against a backdrop of intensifying political fragmentation. And, of course, we have a fundamental pivot in Canada's global economic alignment.
As we look at this, of course, now we are hearing about the Western Hemisphere so much as
January
the US
15th,
is trying to take charge of the Western Hemisphere.
Now, the meteorological situation in southern Alberta has moved beyond a seasonal anomaly into the realm of historic disruption. On Wednesday, January the 14th, 2026, a thermal ridge resulted in the collapse of temperature records across the province, with Medicine Hat reaching a high of 14.4 degrees, a full 5 degrees higher than the previous record of 9.4 degrees established in 1931.
Following the
the scale of this warming event is evidenced by the sheer number of affected locals, with nearly 40 weather stations reporting new daily maximums. And if you're wondering why I'm looking this way instead of directly at the camera, it's because I have a monitor here and I'm just used to watching for your comments coming in the live chat. So it's just my angle for the monitors to watch, even though we're not live tonight. It's just whether or not. But I also have, because of your comments and the chat room being this way, that's where I also have a teleprompter. Make sure that I don't forget what I'm talking about.
This period
so welcome. But let's take a look. The infrastructure implications of this rapid warming are significant. In Edmonton, the quality of the outdoor rinks has degraded into a slushy, unsuitable surface, complicating the city's winter recreation programming. Currently, the city of Edmonton is navigating a budgetary crisis regarding snow removal. Mayor Andrew Knack has acknowledged public frustration over massive windows left windrows on residential streets. Yet the city has ceased towing vehicles during the parking bans due to the high lack of funds. This municipal fiscal strain is mirrored in Lethbridge, and that is where Mayor Blaine Hagen has signaled a back-to-basics approach for the 2026 capital budget, prioritizing, of course, essential water and wastewater infrastructure over new shiny things. A part of what the recent election was all about, and that was fiscal responsibility and tightening of the belt, so to speak. Now, the city is deliberating property tax increases of 3.77% for the next 4 years to maintain base service levels. Now, when you look at this, of course, we'll take a look at where things are at and where they are going when it comes to the fiscal responsibility and the fiscal changes. But in any event, let's take a look now at public safety and the judicial integrity in Lethbridge. So our next story brings us to a concern of everyone, and of course that is public safety, law enforcement, and the criminal justice system. Now, public safety concerns in Lethbridge have been exacerbated by the case of Sky Ateo. This is a 50-year-old male who's facing grave charges of human trafficking, sexual exploitation, and the sexual assault of minors. On January the 13th, 2026, Atoa was rearrested by the Lethbridge Police Service, or the LPS, just 30 minutes after being released on bail. Despite court orders to reside in a specific residence, Atoa was observed in a retail store's perfume aisle in close proximity to a young female witness.
Was in December 2025,
is currently seeking to identify this witness, described as having dark complexion and long, dark, curly hair. This incident has intensified local debates regarding the efficacy of judicial interim releases and the protection of vulnerable populations, especially as the police believe there may be additional victims. The police service is releasing this individual's photo because they do believe there are other victims out there, and are calling on you to come forward if you are a victim or know of other victims.
When we look at that, folks, we'll move on and look at Operation Absolute Resolve.
Now, in response to rising local tensions, Lethbridge has joined the Strong Cities Global Coalition. This is a network of 270 municipalities working to mitigate polarization and extremism. This move aligns Mayor Hagen's public appeal for increased compassion within the community, particularly as residents of Lethbridge and surrounding areas face growing debt issues and economic uncertainty heading into the 2026 fiscal year. And of course, there are individuals out there who are trying to cause separation and frustration with minority communities, blaming them for the problems that we are having. However, in reality, the global markets and the global community are all suffering with inflation rates, with high costs of living, and increasing costs of living that are not keeping up with wages. So therefore, it is
the operational
execution makes it easier for these people who are filled with hate and want to incite division within communities to blame certain groups for their plight in life. And that is just not right and not fair and is not a part of the reality. Now, let's take a look at the Alberta sovereignty movement and political transition, ladies and gentlemen. And that is a political landscape in Alberta that's faced a period of intense fragmentation. In Red Deer, hundreds of residents recently utilized to sign a petition for a referendum on Alberta's separation from Canada. The movement, organized by Stay Free Alberta in support of the Alberta Prosperity Project, is fueled by profound frustration with federal equalization payments and perceived neglect from Ottawa. Proponents like Brandy Bowman cite the inability of youth to find meaningful employment as a primary driver for seeking independence. To trigger a referendum, organizers require 177,732 signatures by May the 2nd, though they face a dueling petition to remain in Canada that has already garnered over 400,000 signatures. Now, concurrently, the provincial government is managing its own leadership transition. Premier Francois Legault's announcement of his resignation from the coalition near Quebec has triggered a leadership race that will define the province's trajectory ahead of the next election. In Alberta, MLA Angela Pitt is currently representing the province at a national conference of state legislatures forum in San Diego, California, aiming to energize Alberta's alliances with U.S. legislators amidst the current trade turbulence that is. As we look forward, we can take a look at the national pivot, ladies and gentlemen, and that we look at the Carney administration and the Beijing Accord. At the federal level, Prime Minister Mark Carney is leading a high-stakes diplomatic mission to Beijing, signaling a new era of relations with China. Arriving on January the 15th, 2026, Carney was welcomed by China's second and third most powerful figures, with Premier Li Qiang hailing a turnaround in bilateral relations. This pivot is a pragmatic response to the isolationist and protectionist policies of the Trump administration, which have forced Canada to seek a rewiring of our global trading system. Carney's agenda, including meetings with the leadership of Alibaba, CATL, and the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, also known as ICBC, aimed at establishing Canada as a strategic partner in the green energy and the digital economy.
You can't throw international law, policy, and other.
This international reorientation faces internal headwinds. Carney's recent meeting with coastal First Nations and Prince Rupert, BC, underscored a deep divide over the government's major projects agenda. Leaders such as Marilyn Slett have reiterated that there is no support for pipelines to the coast or the lifting of the oil tanker moratorium, despite federal efforts to open corridors for Alberta's energy exports. Furthermore, the federal public service is in a state of crisis. The Professional Institute of the Public Service of Canada, or the PIPSC, has issued a warning regarding workforce reduction notices on a scale not seen in decades, specifically citing deep cuts at Statistics Canada.
And crucially,
the PIPSC president, Sean O'Reilly, described this as a generational rollback of public services, threatening the government's capacity to manage economic data and housing policy during a period of acute national uncertainty.
It's all about compliance. It's not about
As we move forward, folks, let's take a look at our sponsor. Yes, before Primetime Live proceeds to our deep dive analysis of current global threats to global stability, we would like to recognize our sponsor, Carry Movers Limited, located in Langley, British Columbia, but serving all of Western Canada and the Northern Territories for long-distance relocations for your home or business. Carry Movers also provides local moving services in the Metro Vancouver and Fraser Valley areas of British Columbia. Now, Carry Movers has become the regional standard for residential and commercial relocation services. Moving is a monumental task, and the stress of a major life transition can be overwhelming. Carry Movers differentiates itself through a philosophy of absolute accountability, offering fully maintained trucks and a highly experienced group of moving crews that bring smiles to your door. Once again, you can find Carry Movers at www.karymovers.com. Carry Movers specializes in high-value logistics, including piano moves for both baby grands and uprights, using their superior preparation techniques to ensure your instruments arrive in pristine condition. For the business community, their commercial moving services include flat rate quotes and expert assembly and disassembly of office workstations, ensuring that your company experiences minimal downtime. Whether you are moving locally or facing a long-distance haul that requires extra caution and full insurance, Carry Movers is committed to going the distance. They are open 7 days a week from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., and you can book your move or ask a question at www.carrymovers.com or call 604-687-1746. They pack, they move, and they deliver you safely to your destination. Now, folks, let's take a look at a geopolitical deep dive. Our tonight's deep dive is looking at Donald Trump and geopolitics that are reshaping the world as we know it. The Donro Doctrine, as he is calling it, a synthesis of the President Donald Trump's surname and the 19th century Monroe Doctrine, has emerged as a defining framework of American foreign policy in 2026. Now, the doctrine asserts an aggressive unilateral claim of American hegemony over the Western Hemisphere, viewing territorial acquisition and resource domination as the primary metrics of national security. Now, let's take a look at the Venezuelan precedent and the Donro Doctrine. The psychological and tactical foundation of the global instability that's currently and ongoing here within the Western Hemisphere and the global community was laid on January the 3rd, 2026, with Operation Absolute Resolve. Now, in a nighttime raid on a military base in Caracas, U.S. Special Forces captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and First Lady Celia Flores. The operation was the first instance of sovereign South American capital being bombed by U.S. forces, and it signaled a transition of the Trump administration's foreign policy from rhetoric to direct interventionism. Now, President Trump has since utilized the success of the Maduro capture to formalize the Donro Doctrine, stating that American dominance in the Western Hemisphere will never be questioned again. This corollary to the Monroe Doctrine treats the Americas as a laboratory for a neo-royalist world order, where the United States, Russia, and China divide the globe into distinct spheres of influence. The administration's strategic goal is the total access to Venezuela's massive oil reserves, currently being facilitated by the return of U.S. oil and gas companies under a newly issued sanctions relief. Now, let's not forget that Donald Trump, as he does with business interests, jumps in before knowing the risks and what it's going to take. He has jumped into this oil claim that they are going to turn the taps on in Venezuela and start making Venezuelans and Americans money at the same time. Of course, there is no legal basis for Donald Trump to be intervening and to be controlling another nation's resources. And for that, of course, there is a lot of international outcry. Moving on with that, Trump is declaring that the U.S. Oil giants are ready to step in. However, this is contrary to what the oil executives are claiming. They state that it is a very costly and probably cost prohibitive move to have them re-enter the Venezuelan oil markets. Given the current instability, followed by future instabilities and unknowns, of course, it is a high-risk gamble for the oil companies who have been shut out of Venezuela before. They have made major investments and built a lot of infrastructure, only to be shut down by the Venezuelan government, and all of that infrastructure confiscated by the federal government there. This puts a huge risk and liability at the hands of the oil companies who are not ready to make that commitment. Further to that, when you look at moving forward, Donald Trump is essentially going to have to make concessions and guarantees to the oil companies throughout the U.S. in order to entice them back into Venezuela. If that happens, of course, it puts the financial risk and the financial costs at the foot of the taxpayers of the United States. He goes on to claim about all of these trillions of dollars that are coming in investments in the U.S., and most of those numbers Trump is just pulling out of his ass. There is no basis for the claims of the tens of trillions of dollars he states are being invested into the United States within his first year of his second term. Of course, this is not unlike most of his other claims, where he just pulls numbers out of his ass and believes that his mega group will just follow blindly and believe every word he says. And the scary part is that a lot of them do. Now, when we move on to look at this, of course, the gas companies are probably not going to be jumping back into Venezuela anytime soon. But even if they do, Trump is looking at over $100 billion in required investment, once again, probably going to be guaranteed at the cost of the American taxpayers, and therefore increasing taxes or raising more money through tariffs, which is essentially another tax on American citizens. Now, let's move on to the Greenland crisis and the annexation and the end of NATO. Of course, Donald Trump, being the puppet that he is with Vladimir Putin's hands so far up his ass, he controls Donald Trump's lips. Now, this is scary because, of course, Putin would like nothing more than to see the collapse of NATO. This not only takes away a lot of the global security, but also when it comes to regional conflicts, gives him more of a green light to go after not only Ukraine, but to expand his attempt to annex other nations in the region. Perhaps the most startling component of the Donro doctrine is the renewed and escalated threat to annex Greenland, a semi-autonomous territory of the Kingdom of Denmark. This is a concern for global leaders and, of course, NATO. President Trump has framed Greenland as a national security imperative, asserting that NATO becomes far more formidable and effective with Greenland in the hands of the United States. This administration has warned that if the territory cannot be acquired through the nice way, diplomacy and financial offers, of course, that being, the U.S. is prepared to use the hard way, and that is military force. And he has even brought up the N-word. Yes, nuclear. Like, this guy is unhinged. Donald Trump, at this point in his second term, not only should he be impeached, he should be imprisoned. And that is a given. But nobody seems to have the balls in Congress or in U.S. government to actually hold him accountable for his crimes. And that is impacting the global community, not just the local. So again, when you look at what he's offering and what they're looking at in terms of that transition or the attempt to annex Greenland, the U.S. is strategically offering. And what are the threats? Let's take a look at that. Direct cash payments are being talked about, ranging from $10,000 to $100,000 per person to residents of Greenland in order to come into the U.S. Now, the total buyout budget would be nearly $6 billion discussed internally. Think about that, folks. You could buy the world's biggest island in a country for $6 billion. Incredibly ridiculous. Now, the security justification that, of course, Donald Trump is throwing out there is that he claims imminent Russian and China occupation of the island, which, of course, cannot happen under NATO. They are a part of Denmark and therefore have the security of the NATO nations. When you look at that, of course, Greenland is the only acceptable outcome according to Donald Trump, and that is just so untrue. When you look at the military mockery, of course, defense is described as two dog sleds when you come to Donald Trump. He thinks that dog sleds are what provide security in Greenland. The point being, though, is that Greenland has the security of NATO. It is under that umbrella, that blanket of comfort. And yet, Donald Trump is the one that is ripping that blanket off to expose the nation to the cold threats that are the new reality. Of course, if Donald Trump is to go in and take over Greenland and annex it, it opens up the whole world to a whole new threat, because it would be the collapse of NATO. Under Article 5, in the theory that an attack against one NATO nation is attack against all, this would turn NATO against the U.S., its primary and major or biggest member. The U.S. would not have blanket coverage under that Article 5 for the simple fact that they are the aggressor. They are aggressing a fellow member of NATO and an ally since the Second World War. The U.S. already has the ability to put troops and bases in Greenland. That is a part of NATO and the agreements that the U.S. has had since the Second World War. NATO and the US used to have a lot more bases in Greenland. Unfortunately, with the US, they didn't see the risk over the last many decades and therefore withdrew a lot of bases out of the Greenland and the northern in the Arctic. Now, of course, this is basically the roosters are coming home to roost, or the hens are coming home to roost, and that is the problem. Trump doesn't see any alternative. Well, at least that's the story he's putting out. He obviously knows that there is absolutely no foundational requirement or need for security or any other reason for the U.S. to take control of Greenland. What does it come down to? Well, there's a lot of oil and gas reserves in Greenland. There are a lot of rare earth minerals. And basically, Donald Trump wants his hands on it. He's offering $6 billion to try and take over a nation worth trillions. And that is what it comes down to. Donald Trump is the most corrupt president in the history of the United States of America. And it will not stop if citizens do not stand up, and the politicians, to demand a peaceful transition, to have Donald Trump either impeached or imprisoned. He is breaking not only U.S. law, constitutional and criminal law, but also international laws that he says do not apply to him. When that happens, you are looking at someone who is out of control and out of touch with reality. And that is what it is about. Donald Trump doesn't care about the citizens of the United States. He doesn't care about world peace. Instead, what he wants to do is take over Greenland, get access to all of those rare earth minerals and those earth elements, to get control of the natural resources such as oil and gas, to make himself richer and his friends richer, while destabilizing the rest of the world and eliminating NATO for his best friend, Vladimir Putin. Now, the international backlash has been profound. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has warned that a U.S. attack on NATO allies would signify the end of the alliance and post-World War II security structures. While Greenlanders have rejected the annexation by an 85% majority in recent polls, the Trump administration has intensified its posture, with senior advisor Stephen Miller, this little troll. His team is posting provocative images of Greenland draped in the American flag. This crisis has forced NATO members to walk a tightrope, balancing the defense of Danish territory and sovereignty against the reality that the U.S. provides $928 billion to the NATO budget. That is nearly double of all other allies combined. And now we turn to Iran. The Iranian red line in the Middle East escalation. Donald Trump is encouraging the protesters to continue their actions and calling out the Iranian government and leadership for killing over 2,000 protesters. And yet, Donald Trump's own ICE teams are out there killing U.S. citizens, locking up U.S. citizens and residents under a failed immigration policy. The reality, folks, is that Donald Trump's immigration actions through his Gestapo ICE organization, at the end of the day, they have deported less illegal immigrants and criminals, as well as innocent immigrants who may be illegal or overstayed their visas and such, in a violent and non-transparent manner. But they've deported less than any other president in the last several decades. So it shows that this is not about border security. This is not about the safety of Americans. It's about his total control of the American people. It's about inciting fear for control. It's about him doing whatever the hell he pleases. And Constitution or other laws be damned. He's going to do it in any way that he wants, with less impactful results than other presidents of the past. We've seen what happened in Minnesota. We've seen what's happening in Portland. We've seen what's happened in Chicago and other cities across the nation. It is a dangerous and scary precipice of time in which the U.S. not only threatens global security, but that of their own citizenry. They are locking up U.S. citizens, an autistic child with hearing impairment, for 50 days. That's 50, yes, 50 days, with absolutely no accountability, folks. They are covering up the murder of Renee Good in Minnesota. They say now that this agent who was on the scene that took the life of this mother was injured, that he suffered internal bleeding as a result of being struck by that vehicle. Let's face it, he should have stuck around at the scene. He should not have been whisked away from the scene of a murder. He was a suspect, or as some would say, he was an agent doing his job, but that is not true. There was absolutely no legal basis or threat to his life and the life of others. All he had to do was take several steps to the right to be out of the way of that vehicle. And the driver was actively turning the wheels to avoid any ICE officers. Now, internal bleeding can be anything from a little bruise on your hand. He was at the hospital to cover his own ass and to cover the ass and liability of the government of the United States. He went to the hospital to give plausible deniability of what really took place. We've all seen it. We've seen the cameras. Why are ICE not using the body cameras that they are supplied? Instead, we're relying on cell phone footage, including that of the officer who claims that his life was in danger, and yet he didn't drop his cell phone. He held his cell phone in one hand and his gun in the other while he took the life of this innocent citizen of Minneapolis. Your natural reaction if you're being hit by a vehicle is going to be to drop what's in your hand, at least the phone anyway, to try to stabilize yourself from falling or being hit further, or to get out of the way. It's not going to be a focus to continue filming as you take the life of an innocent protester. And there's debate about whether she was protesting, whether she was a peaceful observer, but regardless, it's not a capital offense. Now, President Trump has declared a lot of different things. And now we're going to go back to the Iranian red line, because that is, again, about protesters. Iran has shut down the internet services across the nation so that people cannot communicate and show the world what is really going on there. The atrocities being committed against peaceful protests. And that is something that Donald Trump can stand behind. But we also have Elon Musk, who has been ordered by the Iranian government to shut down Starlink so that that service is also unavailable to the people of Iran. There is a bit of pushback by Starlink, but we'll have to watch and see how that plays out, because at the end of the day, let's face it, Elon Musk has a fiduciary responsibility to his shareholders. He is going to do what's in the best interest of himself and his corporation, not as to what's best for humanity. While the Donro doctrine has focused on the Western Hemisphere, the administration has simultaneously escalated its maximum pressure campaign against Iran to the brink of open conflict. As of mid-January 2026, Iran is facing historic unrest sparked by the collapse of the real and hyperinflation. The regime's deadly crackdown has resulted in at least 538 deaths on the official count and over 10,000 arrests, according to human rights monitoring groups, and some groups even estimate it's over 2,000 deaths. President Trump has declared that the Iranian leadership has crossed his red line and has warned that the U.S. military is considering very strong options to intervene. He has explicitly cautioned the Iranian regime, and I quote, "You'd better not start shooting because we'll start shooting too." This rhetoric mirrors the escalation seen in 2020 prior to the elimination of Qasem Soleimani. But the added dimension of the Maduro operation as a successful blueprint for regime decapitation, the Iranian government has responded by designating U.S. and Israeli interests in the Middle East as legitimate targets, setting the stage for a potential regional confrontation. Now, when we look at that, of course, there are reports now that Iran has also publicly on their state news channels made threats of assassination against Donald Trump. Regardless as to your feelings about Donald Trump, it is still a representation of the highest office in the nation of the United States, and any threat to the life of a sitting president or world leader is unacceptable. And that is a very important point to keep in mind, that any removal of a president needs to be peaceful and it has to be legal. At no point is there any excuse for foreign nations to be threatening the life of a president of the United States or any other nation. In Panama, the administration has moved to take back influence over the Panama Canal with Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. He's trying to secure expedited transit for U.S. warships and confirming an increase in U.S. troop deployments to the region. Now, Canada, too, has been caught in the Donro crosshairs. Trump's previous calls for Canada to become the 51st state and his imposition of sweeping tariffs are viewed as part of the strategy to force Canadian compliance with American energy and trade mandates. And as we spoke in the start of the program tonight, ladies and gentlemen, of course, we know that there is an importance to expand our global trade outside of the primary trade partner of the United States of America. When you look at the economic warfare, the tariffs versus the strategic weapons, the administration's 2025 National Security Strategy explicitly treats tariffs as core national and economic security instruments. This has resulted in a world of targeted pressure and midstream retrading, where tariffs assuming and pricing can change overnight. The impact on global economic stability is measurable through the shifting burden of these costs. You can look at all of the different numbers of the different tariff burdens between June in 2025, October 2025, and the forecast for 2026. When you look at U.S. importers, you're looking at, in terms of June, you're looking at a 64% increase on the U.S. importers, on the U.S. citizens, 22%, and foreign exporters at 14%. When you look at the impacts in terms of October 2025, you're looking at 27% for U.S. importers, so it went down some, but you're looking at the cost to U.S. importers increased at 55%, and foreign exporters at 18%. So again, the forecast for the coming year, well, you're looking at U.S. Importers at 8%, U.S. consumers 67%. So you're seeing how this number is being shifted to the consumer and everyday American citizens. And then, of course, for foreign exporters, instead of importers, you're looking at a 25% tariff. The GDP impact for China is less than 1%. So again, it is the brunt of the tariffs hitting the American citizens and global consumers. Analysis indicates that while foreign exporters were initially expected to bear the brunt of the tariffs, the burden has shifted drastically to the U.S. and other global consumers. By mid-2026, consumers are expected to shoulder 67% of the tariff costs. That is American consumers. And that's going to lead to stagflation. That scenario where inflation remains stuck at 2.5% while growth slows. For nations like Mexico and Vietnam, which re-export Chinese goods, the threat of renegotiating trade agreements like the USMCA serves as a mechanism for the U.S. to demand stricter migration and security compliance.
Now, as we look at the nuanced conclusions and the strategic outlook, the global landscape in January 2026 is defined by a systemic erosion of the multilateral institutions that have governed international relations for 70 years. The Donro doctrine represents a move towards a post-Western disorder, where the United States acts not only as the guarantor of a rules-based order, but as a rogue superpower pursuing territorial and resource dominance through force. The direct threat to Greenland and Iran, and the indirect pressure on NATO and Canada suggests that the Trump administration views traditional alliances as liabilities rather than assets. The survival of NATO now rests on the ability of European and Canadian leaders to walk a tightrope, bolstering their own Arctic and regional security while managing an unpredictable Washington. For Canada, the hinge moment described by the Carney government requires an immediate and aggressive diversification of trade and security partnerships. The domestic stability of regions like here in Lethbridge and the broader Alberta province is now inextricably linked to these global shocks, making the 2026 fiscal year one of the most consequential in modern history. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, you've been watching Primetime Live. That is it for tonight's episode. Next week, we're actually going to take a look at Canada's north. We're going to explore the beautiful territory of the Yukon. We'll look at some videos and scenery and wildlife of what makes the Yukon so spectacular, what makes it so inviting, and why it is so historic in the history of Canada. And we'll look at the other northern territories, and we'll see why Canada's north shall remain strong and free, but why it is so important to protect for not only our immediate future, but also for the future of other generations to come. Once again, I am James Cousineau for Primetime Live here at the studios, coming to you on this January the 15th, 2026. I'd also like to take a moment to again thank our episode sponsor, Carry Movers Limited, available at www.carrymovers.com. That's K-A-R-Y movers.com for all of your local and national moving needs. Throughout Western Canada, Carry Movers is a family-owned and operated Canadian company serving for several decades in the realm of residential and commercial, corporate, and industrial relocation services. Once more, Carry Movers is available at www.karymovers.com or by calling 604-687-1746. That's been another episode of Primetime Live here on Jess FM and Jess TV. Thank you very much for tuning in. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, share this episode with others as it helps to get us up in the algorithms and increase our viewers so we can continue the work that we do here. And remember, all of the programs on Jess TV are created, produced, and hosted by a group of people who are of very importance when it comes to getting you the information that you need, whether that's news or other different types of information on lifestyle, entertainment, and